Hi, Sarah. How are you today?
Hi, Stephen. I'm great. How are you doing?
Very good indeed. Very good indeed. I'm sorry to hear you had a bit of a flood this week, but hopefully you're all sort of coming out of that now. So I'm very impressed that you've still been able to join us today after a bit of a disaster this week. So thanks very much. I hope it's getting better.
No, it's such a pleasure to be here. Honestly, it was something I was looking forward to after, wading through the flood waters in the flat. And luckily, this room I'm in wasn't affected. So I'm still safe in here.
Well, fantastic. Really, really fantastic to see you today. And Spotify's one of these phenomenal businesses, isn't it? I mean, you've now the largest audio streaming business in the world. You've got this big job. You're the global director for enterprise marketing. What is it, about this business that keeps booming? Obviously, COVID has helped that, but I mean, what is it about audio, about podcasts, about this world that is what exploding?
Yeah, so we're finding that advertisers of all sizes are just clamoring to work with us right now. And I think that's for several reasons. Number one, it's the opportunity to reach that kind of really deeply immersed audience. One of the big challenges that marketers face these days is just the amount of noise, general noise that's happening for people all the time. And how do you kind of like cut through to deliver your message? And audio offers that kind of deeply immersed moment when you can reach people in a different way. And particularly in moments where other media can't reach. So, if you're cooking or taking a shower or driving, you probably can't be simultaneously like watching a video or something else, but you can be simultaneously listening. It also allows marketers to kind of be part of what's driving culture. So how people are like thinking about themselves in the world, how they're understanding themselves in the world, how they're entertaining themselves, how they're pushing culture forwards. And that's a really exciting place for marketers to be. And finally, it's an opportunity to use some really innovative new technologies that are powering this renaissance for the audio medium. So for me, it's just a complete privilege to be able to work at a company like Spotify that's soundtracking millions of people's lives globally, and also allowing artists to make a good living from their work, as well as helping other marketers to discover the storytelling potential of audio.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I mean, that sort of culture shaping point you raised there is a really interesting one. I do remember actually having the privilege of seeing Daniel Ek speak at Cannes a couple of years ago, and he talked about how Metallica were now using Spotify to get their playlists on a local basis. And they're literally, Spotify is almost deciding for Metallica what tracks they're going to put in Montreal or wherever they're going to go. I mean, that's really interesting because you are genuinely shaping the culture, aren't you, as well as reflecting it?
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I'd say it's probably not Spotify that's deciding for Metallica. It's Spotify's users who are creating these personalized experiences for themselves and curating experiences on Spotify to soundtrack their lives. So we released our annual Culture Next report on Monday, which is a kind of survey and research that we do about millennial and Gen Z Spotify users. So 71% of Spotify free users globally are from those generations. So they're Gen Z or Gen Z, I guess we would say in the UK, or millennial. I talk to Americans a lot, so Gen Z. And they really see audio as this space where they're curating their experience and also interacting with artists and almost like collaborating. You see a lot of artists using platforms like Spotify as a way to interact with their fans and kind of bounce ideas off them. And I think that's something that we'll see more and more of.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the latest developments that you've got going on, I know there's some fantastic things, and you've got all sorts of wonderful partnerships. And I just saw the other day your partnership with TikTok, for example. I mean, a lot of these, how much is the growth being driven by a lot of those new developments? And maybe just talk to us a little bit about some of those developments coming up.
Yeah, so for brands, I think the big, most exciting developments, a lot of them are in the podcast space. Right. So, and that's probably the thing that I'm most excited about right now from Spotify. So we're seeing these kind of technological innovations that are bringing podcast advertising up to the potential it has in terms of the size of the audience. So the podcast audience has just exploded over the last few years, and understandably advertisers are really excited to reach that audience. But some of the technology hasn't always allowed them to use those kind of sophisticated marketing techniques that they might be used to on other digital channels. But we're seeing that catch up happening with things like streaming ad insertion, which is a technology unique to Spotify, which allows you, rather than having the ad like baked into the podcast stream, it allows you to serve ads based on who's listening, where they're listening, etc. So to use that modern day digital targeting and reporting functionality that people are used to from other media. And then we've recently launched Spotify Audience Network in the UK. So that's making podcast advertising possible at scale across titles. So no longer do you have to buy on like a podcast sponsorship title by title basis, but instead allows advertisers to target their specific audience across a whole network of podcasts. So in Europe, we see that there are the audiences there for podcasts and audio generally, but the money, the kind of like the advertising money hasn't yet followed it. But I think with tools like SAI and Spotify Audience Network, it's time for marketers to kind of catch up with the opportunity that podcasting presents.
And you touched there on the whole area of personalization, which obviously you're phenomenal at as a business. And as you say, absolutely, it's your own personal playlist. You can follow, the advertising to follow absolutely the right people and touch the right people. And as you know, the DMA, we talk a lot about intelligent marketing. What's intelligent marketing for us? It's all about this beautiful kind of triumvirate of data, technology, and creativity. And you epitomize that as a business 100%. And you're an intelligent marketeer. I mean, what is it about that sweet spot of those three things? When you talk to advertisers, and you talk about intelligent marketing, what is it that you say to them that gets them excited?
Yeah, so we talk about streaming intelligence, so very, very similar to the idea of intelligent marketing. And that's about leveraging the potential of audio streaming to deliver messages that resonate with users in the moment. And there are sort of three cardinal rules that we talk about in terms of how to create great audio ads for a streaming environment like Spotify. And those are, number one, make your creative adaptive. So adapt to the audience that you're trying to reach and adapt the messaging. So a good example of that is we worked with a US beer brand who adapted their messaging based on the weather, where the listener was going for a run. So if you think about the user in the moment and how you can talk to them in a way that's going to resonate and kind of make sense in that environment, then that immersive listening experience, that ad becomes like a deep part of that rather than something that's interruptive. So the number one rule is to be adaptive to how your audience is listening. Secondly, we recommend that advertisers think about how to be insightful and how to use kind of data-driven techniques to give something useful to the end consumer. So audio can be really insightful. You can help listeners to learn about themselves. You can think about that on the Spotify's consumer campaigns like Wrapped or the recent Only You campaign. It's just really compelling to learn about yourself by getting access to those insights about how you're listening. And similarly, lots of our brand partners kind of make use of that. So Adidas created a campaign with us to promote their night jogger shoes, which allowed listeners to explore how they were listening at night and then build personalized nighttime running playlists. So really fun use of that data. And then finally, make sure that the creative is additive. So you should be sort of like adding something to their experience rather than taking something away. So one of my favorite recent campaigns that we've done was based on the insight that 71% of pet owners play music for their pets. So Frontline created an ad that only dogs could hear. So it was at a frequency that only dogs could hear it. And then they sponsored the podcast, My Dog's Favorite Podcast, to promote the campaign. And they provided playlists that were proven to like lower stress for dogs, which has obviously been an issue. Like there's a lot of research that shows that our pets have also been pretty stressed out by the experiences we've all gone through in the last year. So yeah, so those are the three rules we talk about: be adaptive, be insightful, and be additive.
That's great. And that really, really is intelligent marketing in every way. I love streaming intelligence. That's fantastic. That fits very nicely with it, the way obviously we very much think at the DMA about this brilliance of the data, the tech, and the creativity all coming together, which is absolutely what you're all about as a business. So that's really good. I was very impressed the other day to get my gig emails coming through as well, actually, which were very much curated beautifully as a result of what I would like to go and see. So great example of streaming intelligence there as well, I think. Now let's move on to something quite different and talk about women in business, because you sort of wrote a very, very powerful article in The Guardian a few years ago about the importance of sport, women's sport, in developing leadership, in developing the capabilities and the resilience, if you like, in the workplace and those kind of areas. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because, and I know that, spare your blushes, you've been an Oxford Blue and you're obviously a phenomenal rower, and that's quite massive achievement. But what is it about sport that has helped you there and got you? And what's the lessons, if you like, for aspiring female leaders like yourself in the world of business today?
Yeah, I'm so passionate about the impact that sport can have, particularly for women. And I'm sure there are other hobbies you can have that you can also learn a huge amount but speaking personally, I think I learned more lessons that have served me well in the business arena from rowing than I probably did in any classroom. And I say that having done a 2-year MBA. And I think it really started when I was a teenager. I think looking back, being a teenage girl is really hard. Like, I have so much sympathy for anyone who's going through that right now, because it's just a moment of such kind of vulnerability and insecurity in your life. And I think you get a lot of messaging from society that kind of your main worth is what you look like, and that your body is kind of objectified and all of that kind of thing. And certainly when I was a teenage girl, I think I was about 6 foot. I'm very tall, so I was like 6 foot tall by the time I was 15, and always had really broad shoulders and just didn't conform to that stereotype of like what a teenage girl should look like, and that made me feel very insecure. But then I found rowing, and it was like, no, this thing that you think of as a negative is actually a real positive, and your body is just a tool for helping you to achieve what you want to achieve in life. So I think that's where it started, but it moved on to mean a lot more than just that for me. It was about not being afraid to be ambitious and say, I want to win this race, and I'm going to work really hard to achieve that. And not being afraid to confront just having like those numbers in front of you, when you're on the rowing machine, and it's like, how fast you're going, and you're just living to push those numbers down and go faster and faster. Not being afraid to have that competitive edge. I think women are quite often fed this message of like, being competitive is a bad thing, being ambitious is a bad thing. So sport really taught me to say like, no, I do want to win, I want to achieve, and I understand how to get there. And it also taught me a huge amount about teamwork, like some of the great aspects of teamwork when you're all winning together and you enjoy that, and also how to handle some of the tougher pieces where you might be really good friends with someone, but they're not performing and they have to leave the team, and sometimes that's the case in business as well. And yeah, so I think it was about learning that it was okay to be ambitious. It was also okay to fail. Women are often given the message that failure is worse than even having tried in the first place. And that's something I coach a lot of people on my team now. They, particularly the women, I find they don't necessarily want to go for that stretch promotion or that stretch thing that's really pushing themselves out of their comfort zone, because they think the worst case scenario is I won't get it. Whereas I'm trying to tell them, no, the worst case scenario is you don't learn from the process of trying to get it. In the same way as when I was rowing, sometimes it felt like the worst case scenario was losing, but actually the worst case scenario was not getting better every race that you did. So it's also that kind of growth mindset, and putting yourself out there and being willing to fail.
There's so many great lessons in there. It sort of reminds me of, I saw Catherine Granger speak a while ago, the Olympic rowing medalist, and she was so inspirational, and she talked a lot about, how even when she'd won a race, she would be analysed, the minutiae of their performance be analysed also. So the strength to be able to take criticism is massive, isn't it? And then that's a really interesting lesson that because we don't, let's be honest, we don't generally like taking criticism, do we? However much we recognise it ourselves, and in the business world, you need to do that. So that must be kind of one of the things that has probably helped you along the way. Yeah,
it definitely has. You get used to every outing, just there's another issue, there's another thing that you have to improve. Even Catherine Granger's arguably most talented oarswoman ever in the UK, and I'm sure she was still being picked apart by her coach, you know, after every single thing. And yeah, I can't wait to watch Helen Glover compete in the next Olympics. I think that she's got a documentary coming up on Monday about her decision to go back and try for another Olympic gold after having 3 children. Like, I think she's got 3 children under 3 or under 4 or something, because she had twins.
I know,
absolutely crazy. And I just can't wait to see what she can achieve and how inspirational that's going to be for women who are thinking, particularly after they have children, you know, how do I go back? How do I keep pushing myself? And here's this person who's wanting to achieve at that level. It's incredible.
I also love your point there about being competitive, because there's that sort of adage, isn't there, that if a man sees a CV and he thinks 85% of it he can do, yeah, absolutely, I'll go for that. But if a woman sees 15% they can't do, they think, well, it's not right for me, which I know that's a whole generalization. But that kind of, you know, that self-confidence, and that it's okay to be incredibly assertive and ambitious. That's a good thing. That must be something, again, you've taken from this.
Yeah, definitely. I remember early on at university when I sort of mentioned shyly, like, oh, you know, I'd quite like to maybe think about getting a blue one day. And I said that to one of the coaches actually of the men's crew. And he just looked at me and he was like, Sarah, if you don't back yourself, no one else is going to. Like, you, the first person who has to believe that you can do it is you. And if you do, you'll achieve it. And I was like, yeah, right. And then, like, the year when I was trialing for the first year I was trialing for the crew, one of the more experienced women sort of said to me one day, like, I think you can get into the boat. And I was like in shock. And it reminded me of that moment of, like, if you don't back yourself to do it, no one else is going to. So you have to be the first one to say it's possible.
Brilliant. Fantastic. That's such a fantastic role model for anyone coming through in business, and particularly future female leaders. So I really applaud you for that. So let's go back to Oxford again. And, you know, you studied French and German, which is pretty impressive, and did very well. And then you went to a consulting firm, Booz Allen Hamilton. Now, what was it about consulting? I mean, you know, maybe I'm drawing the wrong analogy here, but, you know, consulting's always struck me as something that really has this art and science attached to it. You know, is there something there that connects it with Spotify, the future? I know you didn't have a grand plan necessarily, maybe you did, but what is it that attracted you to that?
I'd love to say I had a grand plan. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I did. I think there were 2 things that I was always looking for. So number one, learning is really important to me, and continuing to learn. And I saw consulting as an opportunity to learn at a really accelerated rate. You know, everyone said if you go into strategy consulting, you'll kind of learn in 6 months what it might take you 6 years to learn, because it's just a really intense experience. And number 2, I was always really keen to have an international career. I think that's probably also one of the reasons that I studied languages, because I always knew I wanted to live around the world and work around the world and work with people in different cultures and different places, and kind of see the world through their eyes. And consulting seemed like a good way to start that. Also, I got an internship there in the summer before my last year at university, so it was also kind of like a track that existed. Having said that, I don't think I was a very good consultant at all, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. What I didn't enjoy was having to kind of chop and change between projects all the time. What I love is being in a business for quite some period and see it grow, and in the case of Spotify, grow at a pretty fast clip, and kind of approach things differently every year, but still have that grounding of understanding the organization and the mission. And that was quite hard. You never got to sort of see things through. It was all just ideas and not actually like doing it. Whereas working at Spotify and some of the other places I've been has been the opportunity to see those things through year after year.
And you're right in the thick of it, because you're 5 years in Spotify now.
Yeah.
So you've absolutely, talk about immersive. I mean, that's a great case of that, isn't it? But then you went to MTV. So obviously music was of an interest to you there. So was that, what was that, is that a significant point that you moved into a business that was a music-based business, or is it just a coincidence? Definitely
it was significant. Music's always been really important to me. It's what brings you joy, quite frankly. It's the soundtrack. It's, I was always very obsessive when I was rowing seriously over like what the soundtrack was that we were going to listen to in the gym that evening for the training session, because it can really push you like beyond and kind of bring you together as a group. Music just has this huge power. So definitely it was music. And it was also the ability to be part of what was driving culture and helping people to understand themselves. Like that's what I've always loved about literature, culture, media, everything, is it's the stories that help you understand who you are, where you are in the world, what gives you like life and sense of belonging. And you know, when I was studying languages and getting to read literature from France and Germany, that was also the way into those cultures, right? The way of understanding those countries and those people is by, you know, reading those books and watching those films and all of those things. So I was also just so excited to work for a company that got to spend so much time with people every day and kind of help them to understand who they were, and also just, you know, gave them something fun and something entertaining to look forward to. So that's why I've been in media pretty much ever since.
So obviously we've got to go now back to the soundtrack for Rowing, and I need to know what it is. So, what was the track you put on that really?
So the track, if you want to you know, get your rowing machine score to the best it's ever been, is Song 2 by Blur. Because it's just like very strong bass that's like very rhythmic, and that was the one where, you know, if I was deep in like sometimes we used to have to do hour-long sessions on the rowing machine, like absolutely awful. And when that song came on, that was what would kind of like get me through the worst bit. So yeah, you wouldn't think that say necessarily that Damon Albarn's voice would be well suited to that, but it was.
And he doesn't strike me as a rower, but I mean, you know,
I doubt he's ever been on a rowing machine.
But obviously he knows a bit about rowing. So and then of course you moved up to Uyala, if I'm pronouncing
Uyala, yeah.
The video technology provider, and then obviously you came through to Spotify. But you've also done an MBA at Stanford,
yes,
which is extraordinary, really. And as you know, again, you know, the DMA were big believers through the IDM in training, constant training, retraining, getting the best skills, because we're in this world, aren't we, where, you know, let's be honest, unless you're constantly unlearning, learning, relearning and everything, then you don't stand still, you certainly don't disrupt, and you don't move forward. So is that something you'd always want to do? Would you highly recommend it to people coming through in business?
So there were lots of reasons that the MBA was right for me. I mean, I knew that I wanted to pursue a career in business. That was clear to me from even before I graduated from undergrad, that business was the place that was going to allow me to combine that art and science and have that impact on the world. So that was clear to me. But I'd done this undergraduate degree in French and German literature. You know, I didn't necessarily know how to read a balance sheet or how to read an annual report or how to do a marketing plan or anything. And I was increasingly aware that all of the jobs I was looking at, I was thinking I'd quite like that job in 5 years' time. A lot of them said MBA preferred. And I was like, oh, I should probably think about this thing. And then I had a conversation with my dad, and I said, you know, he'd had a successful career in software. And I was like, you know, is there anything you would have done differently? And he said, yeah, I would have done an MBA. So I had both the grounding and also the network. And so I thought, okay, I better look at that. And yeah, applied. And I decided to go over to the West Coast because, you know, I was working in TV, but I could see that there was this big kind of disruption coming with digital media. And, you know, where better to learn about that than in the heart of Silicon Valley. So that was what pushed me to do it. And it actually ended up giving me, I think, way more than I thought. I both learned those kind of baseline business skills, the things that you need to be able to do, you know, accounting and finance and all of that. But it also taught me a huge amount of kind of soft skills. I took this class that's iconic at Stanford. Its nickname is Touchy Feely. I think technically it's actually called Interpersonal Dynamics. And the woman who invented the course recently brought out a book called Connect by Carol Robin, which I would very strongly recommend because it's a good summary of the course. But that was really transformational for me because it helped me to understand how other people were perceiving me, how I was perceiving other people, and how to kind of build those relationships. Because as you progress in your career, you realize that it's the ability to influence people, build close relationships. Those are the things that really set you apart. So it was that. And then I also just met the most incredible and inspirational people. And they had people, you know, alumni come back who'd founded incredible companies. And and it inspires you. It makes you think, okay, if they did that, like why can't I, sort of thing. So for me, the MBA was definitely the right decision. I don't think it's not necessarily the right decision for everyone. You know, other people have different visions for their careers, and I'm not sure all MBA programs are created equal, but for me, it's given me this, yeah, like I said, this great grounding with skills, this great network, and this great sense of ambition of kind of what is possible if you really set your mind to it. Even some of my classmates have gone on to found some pretty incredible companies. So.
I bet they have, because I think what's lovely about that is you're absolutely plugging into that ecosystem out there, aren't you? It's just an extraordinary one, isn't it? That's so well connected, and you know, just learning, as you say, so much just from observationally as well as from an academic perspective, and the connections you make. And do you, I mean, because doing something like that and taking time out in your career, because I think you know, a lot of us, you know, are always thinking, you know, what's the next thing I'm going to do? I've got to move into the next level. I've got to earn some more money or whatever it is. But taking time out to do something like that, and then, you know, sort of coming back, that must be quite a tough thing to do, you know, because you of course you're going to come back and get a fantastic role, but you know, it does sort of take you out of the market for a period of time. Is that a reason, do you think some people don't do it, or do you think that
I think so, yeah. In the UK it's a less common thing to do. In the US it's much more accepted in the US that many more people do postgraduate qualifications of some kind, whether that's an MBA or something else, whereas in the UK it's much less common. I think the most common question I get asked about the MBA decision is, was it worth it? Like, was the ROI that, has it paid for itself, sort of thing? And I mean, the short answer is yes, like in terms of, you know, future earning potential and my career trajectory and all of those things, like yes. But I also think that's the wrong question, because we're not here as human beings on this planet to be ROI positive, right? Like that's not our primary goal. And the relationships I've formed, the ideas about how to find meaning in my career, the clarity around kind of what my mission is in my career and what kind of leader I want to be and what kind of impact I can have on the people I work with, it took that to a whole new level. And I mean, how do you put a price on that, right? So yeah, I think that's the wrong question. I would encourage people to think about those kind of learning opportunities in terms of the impact it's going to have on their whole life, not just on their next job.
And what's your attitude going forward to sort of training? So if you go through your career, or the people that work for you, do you encourage people to take other courses and keep doing that? I mean, what's your kind of ideal kind of training plan, if you like, for yourself and for your team? Yeah.
The first thing I'd say is there's one thing that I will not compromise on in my career, and that's constantly learning. Like if I ever got to a point where months had gone by and I thought, I haven't learned anything new in the next few months, I would start looking for another job immediately. That's kind of the thing that keeps me coming back every day, is the opportunity to learn something new and grow and develop. I think that can look like different things, and that can have a different form in different parts of your career. So sometimes doing your day-to-day job is such a huge learning opportunity in itself that you don't necessarily need to be taking a lot of courses at the same time, either ones that your company offers or externally. You can kind of focus on learning on the job. And then I think there are moments where you probably know deep down, I need to take a step back and get some perspective. And maybe that's just, you take a 2-week holiday and you read a few books, and that might get you there. Or, you might need to take a few months or do a kind of evening program. So I think it's very specific. The place I always start with my team is, what do you want your career to look like in 5 years' time? Not necessarily what job you want, but what do you want your day-to-day life to look like in 5 years' time? And what's the gap between that you think might prevent you from getting to where you want to be in that time frame? And then working back from there, what are the skills that you need to learn, and what are the experiences you therefore need to get exposed to this year, or the courses that might be able to accelerate that learning? So yeah, I think everybody is typically aware. There's sort of like the comfort zone, and then there's the learning zone, and then there's the kind of zone of panic where you're like uncomfortable, and you want to be in the learning zone at all times. So that's the conversation that I have with people on my team, is how to get them into that zone.
I think that's great. And it's sort of baking it into any sort of career plan, isn't it? Because very often, training is one of those things that goes in a depressionary period because people think it's an add-on or it's a nice to have, but of course it isn't. As you rightly say, it's a fundamental part of people's professional development and their growth, isn't it? And learning is it keeps us alive, doesn't it? If we move across then to hiring people then, because I think there's always that debate, isn't there, around hiring about attitude versus skill. And there's always like a sort of balance there about, and then there's people like, I'm sure who say, I go for the character, I go for the attitude, I go for the right sort of person, and then the skills I can always develop that. Or alternatively, I need someone who's got the competency and I can develop. What's your where do you fall on that on that spectrum?
Yeah. So the first thing that I look for when I'm hiring people is motivation, because if somebody's not motivated to learn or do the role, you're not going to be able to teach them. Like there's nothing you can kind of really do about that. And then I look for kind of curiosity and like intellectual horsepower, I'd probably say, because that's what's going to allow them to learn at the pace that you need them to. On the other hand, I mean, a business like Spotify that's just growing so incredibly fast, sometimes you cannot hire the person that's very smart and very motivated but doesn't have the experience. You do sometimes, in some circumstances, you need someone who's going to be able to hit the ground running fairly quickly. You just haven't got the time with the speed the business is moving at necessarily to upskill people, but you've also got to be simultaneously working on growing the people you've already got in the team. So it's definitely not easy, but those are the two things that I try to test for kind of immediately is the motivation, and then like how quickly do they get their heads around the fundamental business challenge, because if you understand that, everything kind of flows from that.
Yeah, very good. Now you talked about failure before, because is our whole, there's, as we know, you're not trying, are you, if you don't fail? What is there anything that you'd be happy to talk about which maybe in your career and life, has been not necessarily the greatest success?
It's funny because this is how we often start my team leads when we have a meeting every week. We often start with fail of the week, which is an idea I got from the female founder of Spanx. I think she was one of the first female self-made billionaires.
Yes.
She also does that. So we try and talk about like what we've failed at. I think the things that stick in my head are where I've failed to support members of my team.
Right.
And then in the last year, I think the things that come to mind is where I've been stressed and tired myself, and then haven't been patient to listen and understand, and I've been in a rush, and then I've realized afterwards, I've really not supported that person in the way that I should have. And so I think the last year and a half coming up against those failings has made me realize has made me reframe all of those things we need, like work-life balance and taking the time to exercise and eat well and sleep and all of that stuff. I've kind of reframed that as that's not something you should do, a kind of like task. That's something that you do for other people. Like you do that so that you can show up how you want to show up as a leader and as a manager for them. So those are the failures that kind of spring to mind. Also in the last year and a half, as we've been thinking about how to engage our clients, it's been a lot of experimentation around, what do virtual events look like? How can we maintain transparency and constant communication with our clients so that they're getting the information that they need in an environment of like extreme uncertainty? And some things we've tried have really worked, and some things have, worked less well. I think it's really hard to engage senior marketers virtually, for example. It's much easier to talk to them on the beach at Cannes than it is to try and get them to join another Zoom call. So we're excited about having those opportunities to connect in person again soon.
Any opportunity to be on the beach in Cannes,
you're not going to turn it down.
You're going to say the glass of rosé is helpful, isn't it? So that's interesting. You're talking about that. Very much. You were illustrating the sort of modern leadership there, and I think that sort of, that emotional intelligence. I mean, if you had to say, what are the key components of a Sarah Kiefer leadership course, the three things that you said that you're all about, or two things, which is about your style, your and your reflection of modern leadership, what would those be?
I think the first thing would definitely, and I'm making this up, I love that idea of a leadership course that I get to design, goodness gracious. Making it off the top of my head, I'd say transparency and context are super important. And I think most people think of themselves as being transparent in that they're not proactively preventing people on their team from accessing information. They don't think of themselves as like, oh my goodness, I'm not disclosing things intentionally. But actual true transparency and providing context takes a huge amount of effort. And it's something I think about every day, is like, what information do the people on my team need in order for them to be empowered to move forward how they should. So you can't have that, I very much believe in empowering my team. But the flip side of that is it places a lot of responsibility on you as a leader to be transparent and provide the context that your team needs in order to move things forward. Because I firmly believe they're the best people to get things done. They know the most about their, I've got team members all over the world. They know their markets best. I'm not going to tell the marketing manager on my team in Japan how to do her job. I have a very little idea what the market reality is in Japan. But what I can do is provide her with the context and the guidance and what's worked in other markets, what hasn't worked in other markets. So I think the first thing would definitely be about transparency and providing context. The second thing I think would be about vulnerability, and that's something I really learned at Stanford. I think I had this idea before Stanford that good leaders just performed well all the time and like never made mistakes and never failed and were just these sort of perfect humans. And you realize that if you try and behave like that, you're actually a really terrible leader. And it's talking about your failures is what frees people up on your team to try difficult things and risk failing themselves. Talking about, the struggles that you've had over the last year. I mean, I've had a pretty hard last year and a half personally, and being open with my team about that means that they then feel able to be open about challenges they're facing in their life and the impact that's having on their work as well. So I think vulnerability is incredibly powerful. So those are the first two. And yeah, I don't know, the third, it's always good to have three things, isn't it? The third thing, I think, is perspective and like priorities. That's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last year, and I've spent a lot of time coaching my team members on, because I think the pandemic has forced people to really think about what's important in their life, and as forces you to make very difficult decisions and prioritize correctly, and making sure that everyone on my team understood that their health and the health of their family and their mental health was the number one most important thing, and everything else could come after that. I think that's really important as well.
Well, that sounds a pretty good course, actually. I think I'm going to be coming on that. If I'm allowed to, if I can afford it, and you let me on it. I really look forward to that leadership course, Sarah. Thank you very much for that. So are we right in talking now about a life work rather than a work-life balance? Is that really the way we should be viewing the world now? Yeah,
I think about that a lot, that my goal is to have a job that I would want to do even if I won the lottery. I'm pretty close to that now. I mean, maybe I'd like to do 4 days a week instead of 5, but otherwise I love what I do. And I often catch myself during the week in the middle of a meeting or whatever it might be thinking, I'm so lucky to get to do this. And I think that's what you should aim for. You're never going to get that every single day. There are always going to be elements of your job that are going to be a little bit of a drudge. We all have the things that we don't enjoy doing, whether it's filing expense reports or balancing budgets or whatever. I actually love balancing the budgets. So that's a bad example for me, but there are definitely things that are less fun. And you kind of, but most of the time, you should be excited about what you're doing. So
that's fantastic. So so you would never compromise on that, really. You would never compromise on finding something that inspired you, you learned from consistently and were curious about. It sounds like that is a thing you would never compromise.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd never compromise on is the learning.
Yeah,
I think I would be willing to go through, a certain period of time of finding it very difficult if I knew that I was learning something that I wouldn't be able to get another way. but yeah, long term, I think you've also got to be able to find that meaning. Every day, if I'm starting to feel demotivated, I think about those people who are getting to listen to music they otherwise wouldn't get to hear, the people who are listening to podcasts, from hearing voices that you maybe wouldn't get to hear anywhere else. That's the amazing thing about podcasting, is if you've got a recording device, you can tell your story in the world, right? And that's going to mean many more diverse voices and diverse stories are going to get heard. And so yeah, when I think about that, when I think about creators and artists getting to live off their work in a way they wouldn't be able to otherwise, it's really easy to then get excited about what we're trying to do.
And you're giving them that audience, right? You're giving them
Yeah.
all these people in the world and all these situations to listen and experience what they love.
Yeah, and with the advertising, a chance for those artists to make money from what they're doing as well, right? To support themselves and also have a job that inspires them and creates meaning in their life.
Well, look, it was really, really lovely to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us today. And you've got an amazing job, and I'm incredibly jealous. Not that I wish you to move on from your job, but if you do move on, please let me know before you do. I might apply for it. No, it's really lovely, and thanks so much for bringing so much joy to me and my family and everyone else with your brilliant business. And it was lovely to talk to you.
It was so great to talk to you as well, Stephen. Highlight of my week. And keep listening. I hope you keep discovering things that bring joy to you on Spotify.
I will do.